is May the 6th, 2024. We are Parashat Kedoshim. We're going to start with Parashat Kedoshim. We've missed a couple of weeks for obvious reasons, the holiday of Pesach, and we're resuming with Parashat Kedoshim. I would say that Parashat Kedoshim is truly one of the most important parshiot, only if it in terms of the content. The content at the beginning, chapter 19, which lays out in front of us the essential components of what it means to be a Jew. I've often referred to the line Kedoshim to you, may you be holy, you shall be holy, as one of the central parts of the Jewish mission, the core of the Jewish mission. I want to focus today not on that, but I want to focus on AHAVA, love, and I'll get the screen up in a second. And the reason why I want to do this is because it is such an important concept. I'll give you just a couple of visuals here. I have, those of you who have the fortune to travel to Israel from time to time. So if you go to Tel Aviv, there's the Shuka Pishpishim. Ilana, what is Shuka Pishpishim?
When you can buy and pay very little.
Flea market.
It's a flea market. Flea market.
It's a flea market.
Flea market.
But
Flea market.
it's the name?
In Yafo.
Not in I'm sorry. Then I'm making a mistake. It's the one that is it's an artist crafty thing you buy.
That's
So
Nachalat Binyamin.
Nachalat Binyamin. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Nachalat Binyamin. Right?
No, Nachalat Binyamin is not Shuka Pishpishim.
That's correct. You're right.
Nachalat Binyamin is Shuka Carmel.
No, well, this is a different. They closed down the streets and they put out, people selling fridge magnets and tchotchkes. It's the tchotchke market. Okay. So last time I was in Israel, I bought 3 fridge magnets because these are photos of graffiti all over Yafo and the Florentine area, which is Ilana's neighborhood and my daughter's neighborhood. Okay. All right. So you see a graffiti on the wall and it says Ve'ahavta, right? And here is again Ve'ahavta. And here is again Ve'ahavta. So somebody is making a graffiti like this, and it's kind of, I don't want to say it's poking, it's an interesting kind of graffiti, okay? It's a graffiti that love your neighbor. We think of V'ahavta, we often think of, what it goes with it, which is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and those things run off our tongue, okay? And it's so interesting, I'll just stop for a second, the way that we construct language, the way that we construct ideas, and how we often take things out of their context, and they have the word V'ahavta has a life on its own, which is why, of course, a graffiti artist puts it up there, and it's like a silk screen. It's not done by hand. It was probably done by a stencil, and that becomes art, and becomes art that is photographed, and then it becomes art that's photographed, that's put on fridge magnets, and people like me will buy them. I originally thought I'd buy them as a gift, but they ended up on my own magnet board. And
recording in progress.
Because not that I need to be reminded about love, but I thought it's a cute thing. Okay. But we do need to look at this as a text, and we need to look at where it comes from, and how that this word is on a journey. So we're gonna just breeze through chapter 19 and see that the context is such a rich, full context of so many different ideas. Right? I don't know why it's doing that. God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the entire community, say to them, holy are you, for I am holy. Each man, ish imo v'aviv tira'u, v'shabtu tishmoro. Each man, his mother and his father, you are to hold in awe. Keep my Sabbaths. I highlighted what I think is the core of each commandment. Okay, we're getting a lot of feedback here. Don't turn your faces to no gods. It's idolatry. Sacrifice the integrity of sacrifices. How you should eat your sacrifices. And then when you harvest the field, harvest your land, harvest your vineyard, certain laws relating to leaving the corner, leaving unharvested grapes. And here, a series of commandments that will remind you of almost the 10 commandments, and some commentaries like to make the connection. We could do a whole lesson on the correlation between the 10 commandments and chapter 19 of Leviticus. No stealing, no lying, no dealing falsely, each man with his fellow. Do not swear falsely. Do not withhold the property of your neighbor. Don't keep neighbor's wages overnight. Don't insult the deaf. Don't put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Do not commit corruption and justice. Judge everyone with equity. Don't traffic in slander. Do not stand by the blood of your neighbor. And here, this familiar passage, we'll return to it. Don't hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your fellow. Do not bear sin. Do not take vengeance. Do not retain anger against the sons of your kinspeople. Be loving to your neighbor. I am the Lord your God. My laws you are to keep, etc. Your animal, you have to mate your animals properly. Don't wear linen and woven garments, shatnez garments. Intimate rules here, sexual rules, offering rules, atonement rules, planting any kind of tree, harvesting rules. Do not eat anything with the blood. Don't practice soothsaying. You are not to round off the edge growth of your head, certain kind of grooming laws. Lo tashchit et patz kenecha. Do not diminish the edge growth of your beard. Okay, so we follow that in some ways. When that is taken and interpreted one way, that is the source of the rule for earlocks, the peot that certain groups among us wear. B'seret lanefesh lo titnu, an incision for a dead person you are not to make in your flesh. Uchtovet kaka lo titnu bachem ani Adonai, writing on skin etching you are not to place in yourselves. And so this is the source of the Jewish prohibition against both self-mutilation and cutting and tattooing. Now, I mentioned, if you were present in Shul on Yizkor, I talked about kriya, the tearing of a garment. And I had never made this connection before, but Maurice Lamb in his book on consolation does. And he says that what I found fascinating is that the tearing of a garment is the evolution of the instinctive desire to gash oneself in pain upon the experience of loss. And it's a connection that he is making, and possibly others are making, to this text here, v'seret lanefesh, an incision for a dead person. You're not to cut yourself for the dead, to imitate the dead, that is to say, the loss of blood, or to experience pain. And of course, those people who are familiar with the modern phenomenon, it's not so modern, but self-mutilation and cutting, understand that when you do that, when you cut yourself, that is to say, when you're cutting, but not suicidal cutting, it's simply it's people who are experiencing a form of mental illness in which they cannot experience pain, and they need to inflict pain on themselves to experience the pain, and they have a certain kind of reaction to that. To a certain extent, that is also what's going on with ketovet ka, which is not the way we understand that word in Yiddish, but it is kakua, which is tattooing. And tattooing has become a ubiquitous phenomenon in our culture for lots of reasons, which we could go into at some point. But here, the origin of it seems to be around the dead, or maybe its connection to the dead. I suspect that tattooing is much more complicated than that. And my hunch is that tattooing is also a desire to place on the body in an indelible way something that is so significant to you that you need to look at it all the time, or you want to be reminded of it. At least that's one of the modern manifestations of tattooing. Of course, I don't think in antiquity they thought about this in terms of art or body art, but there may have been that idea. Tattooing may have been idolatrous and all that. So lots and lots of material on that, and we have our own reaction to it. Of course, it's present already, in a ubiquitous way within Israeli society and within Jewish society, within our, we have our own communities around it, and people that are obviously close to us are also, and so we'll leave it there. And my Sabbaths you're to keep. Don't turn to ghosts. Rise before the gray-haired person, before honor the elderly, and again here, sojourners, when you have a stranger in your land, don't maltreat the stranger. V'ahavta lo kamocha, you are to be loving to him as yourself, because you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Don't commit corruption and injustice, and on and on and on, and that's it. So there are about 48 different commandments according to the Sefer HaChinuch, which is a nice traditional kind of code. It's a digest of commandments. This book, Sefer HaChinuch, I'm holding it up here. What it does, it's a book that, I'll just close the share for a second. This is an interesting book, late 15th century, I think, where the writer goes through each section of the Torah and lists for us all the commandments that are in each one, and gives us basically a philosophical discussion of each of them. And it's a useful book to study. We studied it. It's directed it's usually studied as for younger people, but of course it lends itself to any age. And in this book, on this parsha and this particular chapter, he lists about 48 commandments. There are other digests of the commandments. Maimonides has his own, where he enumerates the commandments. I didn't check how he enumerates all these commandments because he has a different organizational structure altogether. But there are a lot of commandments in this parsha and in that chapter especially, and we could spend hours and hours on almost each one of them. But the most famous one of all of the commandments is, of course, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you were to parachute in from Mars, it would be a question as to why that commandment, as opposed to any of the commandments, honoring your father, or revering your mother, and any of the other, takes so much prominence. Why would someone like Hillel or Akiva, as we're going to see in a second, focus on that? And that, I think, remains a big question. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And this is what Rabbi Akiva says. This is the line that is quoted so often. We only know this part of the line, which is the first part. I'll make it as large as possible. Okay. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Zehu klal gadol b'Torah. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, Rabbi Akiva says. That is a great principle of the Torah. And I'm very, specific about this translation because of the use of the word as opposed to the, right? So it's a great principle as opposed to not the great principle, right? If it was the great principle of the Torah, it would say ze klal gadol b'Torah, but zehu is it is. It happens to be a great principle, and not to be outdone, he is rejoined by Ben Azai, who we remember from the Haggadah, who says no. I love that. Ben Azai Omer zeh sefer toldot adam. Zeh klal gadol mizeh. That's more important. Okay, so I'll just kind of keep that on the screen for a second. The songs that we sing and the things that we teach children and all of us is that, the most important principle in the Torah is love your neighbor as yourself. Hillel said, what is hateful to you, do not do it to your neighbor. That's the Torah, go and study. And blah, 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 blah. And what we have done is by focusing on that and putting that on the fridge magnet, we have made that the core of Judaism. I suspect it's a response in a certain way to the Christian impulse, and that's a good subject for debate, which we'll do, I hope, at the end. But it's a wonder that we didn't put Ben Azai on the fridge magnet and say, and maybe a graffiti artist should go up to every Vahafta in Florentine, in Tel Aviv, and put Ben Azai Omer, they sefer toldot adam, ze kol gadol mizeh. It's a bigger principle, and what I'm joking at is that it's actually a very serious debate. What's more important? Love your neighbor as yourself. What does he mean, Ben Azai, when he says the ze sefer toldot adam? This is the book of the Son of Man. That comes from Genesis 5, verse 1 and 2. Genesis 5, verse 1 and 2 are they're a summation of the Genesis story. We've gone through the creation, 2 stories of creation. We've gone through Adam and Eve. We've gone through Cain and Abel, and we've gone through a few, things following that. And then we get a kind of, here's everything. This is the record. This is now the way that people, this is the genealogy, or Ze Sefer Toldot Adam. Sefer here is translated as record, the document of, this is the recording of, this is the testimony of, Toldot Adam, the generations of man, Adam, humankind, Biyom Bro Elohim Adam, at the time of God's creating humankind, Bidmut Elohim Asauto, in the likeness of God did he make it. Zachar nekeva bera'am, male and female he created them, vayvorechotam, and he blessed them, vayikrat shemam adam, and he called them their name humankind, b'yom hibaram, on the day that he created him, on the day of their being created, more specifically. And so why would Ben Azai say that this is more important? And the easiest answer, I think, is that we have the principle of universality here, or equality here. The principle that all human beings are created in the image of God, and all human beings share the same origin. Okay, and so what we should do really is, when we teach this, to put Rabbi Akiva on one side of the room and put Ben Azai on the other side of the room, the same way we would do Hillel and Shammai, and say, argue your points. Your points are actually valid. Akiva becomes the dominant voice of the tradition because I think it's responding to the cultural impetus that was created by Christianity as a response to Christianity in the broadest sense. But Ben Azai has a point to him, which is when you think about it, and if we were to debate these things, what would you debate? Would you debate the idea that you have to love your neighbor as yourself, and try and interpret what that means, because it's very complicated. Do I have to love my neighbor when my neighbor is loathsome, disgusting, and repugnant? In what way do I still have to love my neighbor when my neighbor is a repulsive person? So you could go two directions with that, which is, well, the Torah is saying here that there's no condition here, or maybe the Torah is laying conditions here, and maybe there's something else going on here, which is where I would go. And maybe it's important to think of the idea, whether or not your neighbor is repulsive, you still have a human obligation to your neighbor. So which motivation will make you act towards your neighbor? Love, or the sense that your neighbor is a fellow human being? I'll stop only because,
It's hard.
things that you learn as a child stay with you for your whole life. And I, as a child, was a very good swimmer. I say it as a child because that no longer applies. I was very fast, and I was a good swimmer, and I took all the swimming lessons and got all the badges and certifications, life-saving. The motto of the Royal Life-Saving Society of Canada was, "Whosoever you see in distress, recognize him as your fellow man." That was written in 1970, and it has since been egalitarianized. Whoever see in distress, recognize him or her as a fellow human being. Okay, be that as it may, what that says is, when you see someone drowning, this is the way it was drummed into us. When you see someone drowning or in distress, you drop everything and you save that person according to the skills that we are teaching you: reach, throw, row, go, tow, or whatever is that was you learned these things because they were mechanisms to help save another person and also save yourself, right? And we could go through each one of them, but you get the point. The point is that at what point do you only endanger yourself when that's the last resort, and that you can extricate yourself from a situation. You don't dive in right away to save someone. You look for a reaching assist, etc. Okay. The point is that it's not because of love that I save another human being. It's Ben Azai. It's because of Ben Azai. When I'm following the Royal Canadian Life Society principles, I'm Ben Azai and I'm not Rabbi Akiva. Because if I was Rabbi Akiva, I would have a second's worth of doubt. Do I know this person? Do I not know this person? Do I love this person? Do I not person? And it takes a much more heroic leap to say, well, I love all human beings equally, and therefore I'm going to save all human beings. I don't need that emotional leap when I simply have Ben Azai in front of me. So I could make a good argument for Ben Azai as the most important principle, because the most important principle in my interactions with other human beings is to see each and every human being as being a fellow image of God. Sof pasuk, end of story. Okay, and not v'ahavta. So Akiva is you can see that the Talmud is tugging at it. It's interesting that quote only appears once in the Talmud. You would think that's because it's such a widely quoted thing, it would be all over the place, but it's not. It's only once, and it's in the Jerusalem Talmud, and it's in the Midrash in a much more elaborated way. but it flows into the popular culture, Jewish culture, in a way that I think is really interesting. Susan, go ahead.
So I could say, if you saw Hitler drowning, would you go? But you could today, if we could bring this up today. If you saw Sinwar drowning, do you go in and
Yes,
get?
really good questions, and uh, so my answer is a cop out, because I wouldn't necessarily be able to identify them. You'd identify them only after the fact. We can't get too deep in the ethics and the personal revulsion. Go ahead, Fruth.
There have been cases, in Israel when the victim and the terrorist end up in the same emergency room. But on October 7th, I remember reading, I don't remember if it was all hospitals or if it was just Hadassah, because I'm a member of Hadassah. They made a conscious decision not to treat terrorists. They weren't doing it.
We can understand there are certain limitations to even the sense of common humanity, because murderers, we feel need to be punished. And why do we need to expend, resources, energy, especially in emergency situations, that will prolong the lives of murderers as opposed to victims? I think that's the dynamic at play. How it stands up in terms of ethics is a very worthy discussion. Okay, John.
I think Ben Azai is a more universal.
Yes.
Because the question arises, who is your neighbor?
Okay, very good. And what technically is a neighbor, right? And is it in the radius of 50 cubits or 500 cubits? I think and we avoid a kind of legalistic conversation when we go to Ben Azai, I think.
When it was written originally, did they consider the Canaanite a neighbor?
Well, Canaanites come under a different category. We'll see that it's also, the stranger among you. That's a Canaanite, and you have an obligation to that Canaanite as well. But we're going to talk. We'll go in that direction where we'll see that there, the word is the problem, and the definition of the word is the problem, and we forget that when we study this. Ilana, go ahead.
There is a little problem, because if we were created by the image of God, and God created all of us, the good ones, the bad ones, how do we do it if God loves all his creations? Like in Yetziat Mitzrayim, it says not to be so very happy because God is not so, because God is sad, because his creations, the Egyptians, are drowning.
Well, even God himself has to wrestle with the balance between justice and compassion. And the text that you mentioned, God's lament over the perishing of the Egyptians, it really is about the question of how a just God executes judgment on his own creatures, which are related to him. So there is a tremendous pathos in God, that God, like any parent, when they have to punish their child, doesn't do so out of a sense of glee or satisfaction, but is tremendously remorseful about it, and especially if the child has committed a heinous act of evil. And this is, it's a worthy conversation about the image of God and the limits of the ethical instincts and the ethical reasoning as opposed to emotion. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, a question. Instead of taking "you shall love your neighbor as yourself" out of context, is there any significance to the fact that it's preceded by "you shall neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge
Yes.
against the members of your people" as the lead-in to this statement?
Yes, there is. There totally is, and we'll get a chance to kind of parse that out, because the love your neighbor as yourself really is in a context of social relationships that you have with your neighbor that we will now take a look at. But before we do that, I want to just go through the different strategies of this. So I mentioned, and Bob, I'm gonna get to the question as we go through this. The word is the problem. I have a program, a website called Al HaTorah. It's ALHATORAH.org. And it has, I'll show you in a second, it has the ability to look up a word and find how the word is distributed. So here we have a beautiful bar graph of all the times any form of the word Aleph, Hey, Bet occurs in the entire Torah. There are 211 times. You see that it's 15 in Breshit, 39 in the book of Psalms. That shouldn't surprise us, okay? I'm going to now go to that website and show you what's going on there and how it works, okay? Give you a second here. So, 2 seconds. Okay. This is on the word v'ahavta and ahavta, or sorry, v'ahavta and v'ahavtem. So if I take out v'ahavtem, I have only 2 v'ahavtas in Leviticus and 2 v'ahavtas in Deuteronomy. If I want to find all of them, according to this little contraption here, is really great. Kol hatzurot means all forms of the verb aleph hey vet, and that's my graph that I had before. Okay, but if I take that away, and I want to find just where it says v'ahavta, okay, I will go here, and now I have 2. So it's interesting that you shall love, v'ahavta, occurs only 4 times in the entire Torah, really 4 times in the entire Tanakh, okay? And if I click on the bar, I'll see where else it's twice in our chapter, only in Leviticus, and then twice in Devarim. I'll go back to our chapter for a second. We have Loti kom v'loti tor b'nei amecha. This is our verse, 19:18 in Leviticus. Do not bear a grudge, do not sustain your anger against your fellow. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then later on, it's regarding the stranger, which I would have as the minority in your midst. Hagir hagar itchem, ve'ahavta lo kamocha. You shall love that person as yourself. And again, we have the idea that there are people outside of yourself that you are to relate to as you would to yourself, whatever that means. Now, who is the other entity that you are to love? That's God. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha me'odecha. Love the Lord with all your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And then again in Deuteronomy 11, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You shall love the Lord your God and keep all the statutes, etc. So there are 4 instances of a commandment that you shall love, okay, in the singular. You shall love the neighbor, you shall love the stranger, you shall love God. That's it, okay? It's interesting that it never tells you love your children, love your parents, love your spouse, love your, it doesn't say that. And we would have to then ask, well, why? Well, I think the obvious answer that comes to mind is because, you would think it's the natural instinct of a parent to love their child and a child to love their parent. It's a natural, instinct, or it's the bond that is created between spouses, that they love each other, unless, of course, that bond dissolves. And so you have different orders of relationship between those individuals. Ilana, your question.
There is a difference between two sentences. It says, "Ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha," and then when it's about God, it says, "Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha." So, "Ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha," maybe you should give love to your neighbor, le. But when it's to God, you should directly love God.
Okay, so this only underscores the difficulty in translating the word ava. And is it an emotion, or is it an action? Is it a feeling, or is it a deed? And it's all of the above and more, depending on what context it is. And depending, again, it's like in a dictionary, you'll have meaning one, meaning two, meaning three. There is a semantic range. I want to go back to an idea that I've quoted from time to time, the philosopher Micha Goodman, who is very fond of saying there are many, many different types of hate, and there are many, many different types of love. We use the word love and we use the word hate. For example, the hatred of others is called xenophobia. The love of country is called patriotism. So, love can have an object when I have an emotional attachment to something, or I have an interaction with something. And there are different species of love, depending on, who is the lover and who is the being loved. But there may be something else going on with regard to the word ahava altogether, and that we'll see in a second. Go ahead, Susie.
So according to the book Recalling the Covenant by, I forget his first name, Shama, I'll get it in a second.
Also, shpoch ahavatcha.
Rabbi Moshe Shama. The Ahavta et Hashem Elokecha is, and he I don't remember how he proved it, but it says it means to be loyal. And he said that solves all the problems where you say, how can you command love?
Sure. Who's that book again?
Recalling the Covenant. It's very good.
By
Moshe Shama.
Moshe Shama. Okay. So we're going to talk about that in a second, that ahava can mean and may, in fact, have this a valence that we don't pay as much attention to as we should,
He likes numbers too.
Which is, I'm sorry.
He likes numbers too.
Okay, loyalty. Okay, here we go. Not love. This is this one. Okay, so 4 times in the Torah, your kinsman, the stranger, God. What does ahava mean? Different kinds of love, different kinds of hate. So there's Ilana, emotional love. Simeni kachotem al libecha, kachotem al zorecha, ki aza chamavet ahava, kasha kishol kina, rishafeha rishpei esh shalhevet ya. Verse from Song of Songs, let me be a seal upon your heart, like the seal upon your hand. For love is fierce as death, passion is mighty as Sheol, its darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. So it's clear I think that in this verse, the poet is referring to love as passion, the passionate attachment that people have towards each other. Namely, it's probably spouse, husband to a wife, a man to a woman. This is, the unabashedly heterosexual love here, and the idea of the fervent passion that two lovers would have for each other. Mayim rabim lo yuchlu lechabot et ahava, uneharot lo yishtifuha. אם ייתן איש את כל הון ביתו באהבה, בוז יבוזו לו. Vast floods cannot quench love, nor rivers drown it. If a man offered all his wealth for love, he would be laughed to scorn. So again, these are verses that are hyperbolic expressions of the deep romantic love that a person can experience when you fall in love. Okay, we didn't have Sinatra in antiquity, but you can understand the deep emotion power of this, that love between husband and a wife is the love that changes the world, that organizes all of the structures of the way that the humanity propagates itself. Of course, this is our traditional orientation in the biblical worldview. Okay, so there's romantic love, and that's found interestingly in the Bible. Isaac loved Rebekah, Jacob loved Rachel, and many more. Shechem thought he was in love with Dinah, but that was a little more problematic. But AHAVA also means affective love and emotional love, unbridled. But what do you do with Avraham? When it says to Avraham, God says to Avraham, Kachna et bincha yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak, take your son, your only one, the one you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him up as an offering on one of the mountains that I will tell you. So this is very interesting. You're going to take the one you love. Okay, this is your child. This is parental love. But wait a minute. And the Midrash classically sees the problem here, which you may be familiar with, which is, I have two children. Take the one you love, but I have two children that I love. The Midrash argues this out. I would rather have Ishmael. Let me, that's Abraham's plea to God before Isaac is born. There's so much frustration. Abraham loves Ishmael. It is deeply offensive to his moral sensibility when he is told by God to kick Ishmael out of the household. Vayira davar me'od b'nei Avraham. It is offensive to him. Avraham had feelings for Ishmael. How could God say the one you love to only in reference to Isaac? The one you love is also a reference to Ishmael. But Asher Ahavta means more than feelings. He's just ejected Ishmael. He would still possibly have had an emotional bond with him, but he has canceled his parental bond to him. Interestingly enough, he doesn't cut his bond with Abraham because he buries together with Isaac. So there is a bond that happens with Abraham and Ishmael. It remains, but it's something more. The rabbis pick this up, Bincha Asher Ahavta, and where Abraham says, It tchumim b'maya. Do I have any limits to my parental love in my intestine, my kishkas? There's affective love. He emotionally loves both children. But when the text says Asher Ahavta, it has to mean more now than just emotional love. And here we'll introduce the idea of loyalty, commitment, the idea of shared destiny. That, of course, while Abraham still loves Ishmael in his guts, he is no longer committed to him as a father. But he is committed to Isaac. And his parental bond of love is not only emotional, it is a covenantal commitment of the future. What if we understood it differently? The one you are committed to. So it's complicated, but love is complicated. So let's turn now to love your neighbor, and now the context. The context goes all the way back to verse 11. And look where I'm highlighting all of these different objects, okay? Who is the person in the relationship? Amito re'echa achicha, amitecha re'echa achicha. And I didn't bring the translation here, so I'll just read it and translate. Lo tignovu, lo tichachashu, lo tishakaru, ish bamito, do not steal, do not lie, do not swear, do not lie, be dishonest, do not swear, do not lie, ish bamito, a man to his companion, to his countrymen. Do not swear by my name falsely and desecrate the name of your God. Lo ta'ashok et re'echa. Do not abuse your neighbor. Lo tigzol. Do not steal. Do not remain with your the workers' wages until morning. And now a specific individual, the deaf person, you're not supposed to curse the deaf. Lifnei iver, the blind. Do not put stumbling blocks in front of the blind. Do not do not practice justice unjustly. Do not take bribes. Betzedek tishpot amitecha. You shall judge your countrymen with equity. Do not go gossiping among your people. Lo tamod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Lo tisna et achicha. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tocheach et amitecha. Rebuke your kinsman. Lo tisa alav chet. Do not do so sinfully. Lo tikom v'lo titor et bnei amecha. Do not bear a grudge or conspire against your countrymen. But love your neighbor as yourself. So this is the ground zero of love your neighbor, the context of interpersonal laws and laws pertaining to the administration of justice. We have all these terms for kinsman, neighbor, and countryman. They're used interchangeably, but only once is the term brother used. Do not hate your brother in your heart. It's always interesting me to remark on this, that everybody else gets a kind of, you have to do this, you have to relate this way, but with regard to your brother, it says do not hate, and that conjures up the Joseph story. Joseph is loved by Jacob because he is Ben Zkunim, but it's really because of his commitment to Rachel. It's not only love, but it's loyalty and commitment. He's loyal to the memory of his late wife. He's committed to her, and he expresses that commitment in his behavior towards Joseph. Joseph has the status of authority. He's deputized by Jacob, and the relationship between Joseph and the brothers breaks down. And it breaks down because they despise him. The Torah says, "Velo Yosifu Odson v'yisneu oto." They hate him, and they hate him even more. They hate him more. So we have the following suggestion of a reading. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not spread lies and gossip and talebearing. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. Do not stand idly by when the relationship falters. Do not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. But when that happens, the relationship will quickly unravel, as will all relationships, even on the slightest offense. Fix the relationship. The remedy for hate is not love, but tochacha, rebuke, remonstration, raising the issue, because if you don't, you will end up taking vengeance and bearing a grudge. And you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge, because that is the death of society. And because you are to be loyally committed to your neighbor, because he is like you, I am the Lord. And what I'm saying here is that what you have here is a more, it's a kind of essay in a society. We understand. I'll stop it here, even though we need to see the text. Society is built on relationships, and the fundamental relationships are at play here. What are those fundamental relationships? I have a neighbor. I have my neighbor across the street, my neighbor next door. I have the people I worship with in my congregation. Okay, so we wrestle with this, and I think realistically, all of us wrestle with this all the time. So I want to be realistic about it and say, is it possible to have affection for everyone? And the answer is no. None of us, unless we have, we're endowed with this unique capability. And there are people that are endowed with extraordinary abilities for lots of things. It shouldn't be altogether surprising that people can be loving unconditionally to everyone. But realistically, I think it's a very high demand to place on everyone, that you have to love everyone unconditionally. It's not easy. So you could say, well, the commandment is addressing that. It's saying, well, you have to do what's difficult, and even when you have difficulty with people, you have to love another person, even though it's difficult, even though you can't stand them. And I think that might be a misinterpretation. Rather, you could say, I may not love another person in the way that you think I'm emotionally attached to. I need to be emotionally attached, but I'm fiercely committed to that other person. And I think by saying I am loyal to that person, I'm committed, I share the destiny of that person. I share what we would say and how we would I live in the same story as that person. I may not have a relationship with that person. I may not know that person. I may not even have any kind of affection for that person. That person is loathsome to me and repugnant in many ways, but I share a covenantal destiny with that person, and therefore I'm found in the same story. And that puts upon me a responsibility that is a mandatory responsibility. Stanley, go ahead.
So I'm just thinking about it. I think we sort of automatically assume when we say you should love your neighbor as yourself, that we, of course, love ourselves. But in fact, we do not always love ourselves. There are times when we don't, when we feel guilty, we've sinned, we've done something wrong. So it sort of gives us an out. That is, if we don't love ourselves all the time, then we don't have to love the other person all the time. It's aspirational. I understand what you're saying, but there's some room there for having other than loving feelings towards your neighbor.
I would, the only, the semantic argument that I would have with you is I may not, I may have a moment of self-loathing, okay? I may experience that from time to time, as we may all do, especially when we disappoint ourselves. But most of us will act in our own self-interest. We will act with loyalty to ourselves when it comes to taking care of ourselves. That at least the primary responsibility that we have is, unless we are damaged in a way that I'm sure you could elaborate on, that we need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of our households. We act in a certain sense of obligation to ourselves to make sure that we survive. Now, people who experience malady may not be, they may have a certain kind of, they may feel that they can't do that, they can't act with loyalty towards themselves. But the state, I mean, it is, it's not because I'm emotionally connected to myself. I feel I need to protect myself. I need to defend myself. I need to act in my own interest. And when I understand my own interest in terms of self-preservation, I need to apply those standards to my neighbor. And I need to be as committed to my neighbor as I am to myself. And not necessarily because I love myself or I love my neighbor. I just know that as people who share in a community, we share a destiny together. And so I have to act with loyalty to those who share the destiny with me. Okay, I've
Yeah,
been listening to a lot.
that's very interesting. I would only add, though, I think, and you're at least hinting at that, that there is a certain degree of self-punishment that people do and have. And it's not only the extreme psychopathology where that you find that.
Right,
Times we all engage in that kind of difficult
right.
self-blame and self-punishment.
So I'm saying this only because we're actually in a moment in that's being highlighted for us daily, and the press loves this. They just relish this. When you are reading stories about the protest, invariably they'll hone in on a Jewish anti-Zionist, okay? And nothing is, to me, more nauseating than to encounter that, not knowing full well that of course we live in a community that has tremendous diversity, and knowing full well that including many of people that may in fact be 1, 2, 3 degrees removed from us may have those feelings. And yet the sense that a Jewish person would put themselves outside the Jewish story creates, I think, a boundary line that is now in sharp relief, which is to say, do I feel obligated and a sense of commitment and a sense of loyalty to another Jew who is undermining the Jewish story to the point that, if taken to the extreme, the actual survival of Jewish people and not Jewish people would be threatened by that? I think it's a very profound question. Look, I before in preparation, and of course I don't have a way to bring this to you. I draw your attention to the Dan Senor podcast. It's a few weeks ago. He had Yossi Klein Halevi talking with Rabbi David Ingber, in which they talk about this question of, when Jews are anti-Zionist, what is my sense of obligation to them? And in reference to a specific individual who is a noted anti-Zionist, Yossi Klein Halevi basically said, I have nothing, I have no shared destiny. I do not share that story. That person is an enemy, and that person is outside. And therefore, I do not share a commitment. He says, I don't care if he davens 5 times a day. That person is not in the shared Jewish story. It's a phenomenal statement, and it's something that's in sharp relief now. So we'll start with Bob, then Skip. Go ahead.
Yeah, several comments. First of all, I find your analysis extremely compelling, and am in full agreement with it, particularly in terms of the lead-in that if you do all of these, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, you may be more capable of being
Indeed.
able to show love to your neighbor. The comment I was going to make in addition, though, is I find it interesting that this is going on while we're counting the Omer. Because again, in the Hasidic movements, each day is supposed to represent working on different midot and developing one's own traits and character. And I heard some interesting discussions of how this verse is used in Musar in terms of saying, don't seek honor for yourself, but be sure to give honor to others as another form of love, as another form of building up the other person so that you meet their physical needs and it meets your spiritual needs. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on where the Omer, 49 days, 48 verses, interesting juxtapositions.
The Omer period, which we're in, today is the 13th day of the Omer. It provides, it's a useful framework for lots and lots of exploration. And of course, it gave rise to precisely the kind of mystical enumeration that you are describing. In fact, you'll find it in very common, many Sidurim. You'll have the little, configuration of the day, Chesed Shebe, taking one of the Sfirot and linking it with another of the Sfirot, and that becomes a useful, a framework. But then for some of us, it's counting. I would like to say it as follows. I wouldn't be, I'm not going to be too cheeky about it, but I say, what's going on here in the Omer, I'll start with periods of time are transformative in the Jewish calendar. and that works for me. We have several periods in the Jewish calendar throughout the Jewish year that kind of work as 50-day periods or 49-day periods. Take from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur. It's a 50-day period, essentially, or a 40-day period, I'm sorry. And that is supposed to be a period of introspection and growth. And you know, I once found something that if you want to change a habit, it takes about 6 or 7 weeks. So there's something quite, natural about this in the sense that working on a character trait takes time. And that's a piece of wisdom that comes from the Omer. Historically, the Omer is about the ripening of the wheat and the wheat harvest in the land of Israel. As diaspora Jews, we're not tied to the rhythms of that land, so therefore we have the luxury to expound on other mystical matters. Skip, go ahead.
No, I look at love and hate as absolutes.
Okay.
I mean, there are absolutes. But the way I would interpret this, love thy neighbor as thyself, is more physical.
Interesting.
In other words, protecting.
Nice. Okay.
I mean, I have a neighbor that I'm appalled
Yeah.
at what's coming out of his church.
Okay.
Okay. But if they're in distress physically, I'm going to be one of the first people across the border.
Well, there you go. So that's your sense of loyalty and commitment to a fellow human being. That's,
Correct.
that's the Ben Izai sentiment here. And as I say, I so appreciate the fact that he's part of the conversation, and that what he's doing is he's not disagreeing with Akiva, but he's saying, look, there's another side to this, and it's you're saying I need to be involved with someone, and I'm saying I need to be loyal and committed to someone, and they touch different parts of a human personality. I need to be involved with them regardless about how I feel about them.
Right.
And that is a very, very deep sense. Ilana, go ahead.
Just a little comment. AHAVA in Gematria is 13, and maybe it's a little reminder of the 13 midot, 13 attributes to follow.
Yes, very nice, and we can be loving to God, and I'll end with this because it does say love God, and let's be honest. For many Jews, especially on Yom HaShoah, when we reckon with this catastrophe and anguish and the loss and the trauma of it, what the deepest part of the trauma is the breaking of the relationship. And for Jews in the post-Holocaust, it's not easy to love God. It's very hard to love God. So Jews have a particular Jewish way of reconciling it, which is, I may not love you so much today, God, but I do feel loyal to you, and I will act out of loyalty to you with ferocity, despite what we have gone through, despite all of the suffering that we have had because we are Jews, because we take our relationship with you so seriously, even though we feel let down by you in ways that, of course, we cannot even comprehend and cannot, it's just our human reaction. It's a natural human reaction when faced with catastrophe to feel that something has let us down. Despite that, we will continue to be loyal to you and continue to, and do that with every ounce of our being. And in a way, say, we're going to show you our loyalty to you despite you. That's a Jewish response. That's a way to do it. Anyway, I mean, of course, there are other valences that Jews have towards God, and Jews have, certainly a romantic valence and an emotional valence and a sense of, gratitude. you see that all over. It's, you know, in music and popular Jewish culture everywhere. Baruch Hashem, all that stuff, you know, thank you Hashem. That's very popular too. And but it's not a simple relationship. You know, in my Tuesday class, I brought a snippet of a video of a woman whose son is a hostage. She's a religious woman. And she says, I pray to God every day, and me and God, we're having our problem right now. We have a problem in our relationship, and I'm trying to work on that. And that to me suggests there's an intimacy here that's a bond of that's not a human bond, but it's also a sense I'm loyal to you despite what I'm going through, which is I want if you were here, I'd take you and I'd be angry at you. And that has its place. At any rate, we all want comfort. We all want strength. These days are complicated and challenging as they unfold for us. I suspect that things are going to get even a little more challenging in the days and weeks to come as we get news that this operation may be happening shortly. At any rate, I want to wish everyone a good week. We won't be back next week for the class, but we'll be back, God willing, in 2 weeks.
Congratulations on your daughter's graduation again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Mazel
And
Tov
to the
and
bubby as well.
Yasher
To the bubby as well.
good
She's
week,
going to come
all.
down.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.